stop for coming to celebrate the birthday, the 200th birthday, of Fanny Appleton Longfellow. She's looking pretty good, huh? So at this site, we have been talking about this for over a year, and it is finally the day, and we are so happy that you could come here to celebrate with us. Before I dive into the intro, I heard that there were a lot of questions about where the restrooms are. So I'm going to deal with logistics. The men's restroom is on this floor. The women's restroom is one floor down. If you need it. All right, back into the normal thing. All right. So this lecture tonight is part of our annual James and Shea Lecture series. Some of you might know that name. It is in honor of the site's former site manager, who is an unwavering advocate for this site, and he's also here today. Hey, Jim. All the work that you put into the house, we are still reaping the benefits of that, so thank you. So the focus this year was on unearthing the full story of this woman. She is the poet's wife. He was very famous, but we want to know who she was. And we've been looking through her letters, her journals, her objects to see what her full story is. It's been a big group project, and you're going to hear a bit about it tonight. There's someone who thankfully took up the challenge of unearthing her story, and that is the author, Nicholas Basbanes, who you're going to hear from tonight. Nick has a long relationship with the site. He actually came here with Jim Shea, I think on the first touch. That was before my time. But he came back. In that time, he has become the author of 9 critically acclaimed works of cultural history, focusing on books and book culture, which means he writes excellent books about books. Some of those, in case you're curious, include A Gentle Madness, A Splendor of Letters, and On Paper, the everything of its 2,000-year history. Most recently, he was awarded a Public Scholar Research Grant from Alfred A. Knopf and the National Endowment for the Humanities for his new book. That's what brought him back to the house. He is writing this book as a dual biography of Fanny and Henry Longfellow. Through his research with that, he started with Henry and got to know her. And he's going to share with you some of what he found through going through the site's letters and journals and exploring its rich collection. That's going to shed light not only on her, but the world in which she lived today. So without further ado, here's Nick.
Well, Anna, thank you once again for that wonderful introduction. Thank you, Kate, for getting the sound system up. I just can't tell you what a wonderful honor it is to be giving the James M. Shea Lecture. Jim Shea, who is seated here in the front row, has been more than a friend to me and more than a helper. He's been my guide. I think of him really as my Virgil. I've said it more than once. Dante had his Virgil, I have had my Jim Shea, and he has been marvelous. He is retired, but nobody knows more about this house, these people, these collections, and the artifacts, which I'm really principally discussing today. We'll be talking about the letters and the journals. They're important because they're objects and they are here. But what has really been exciting for me is to go into this magnificent historical site. It's really a national treasure. I think it's probably unique in the National Park Service. I can't think of another national park site that is not only a national park, but a genuine, authentic research center. Because there are, I think we estimate 800,000, is that the number we use, Jim? 800,000 items in there, items which can vary from pencil stubs, where Henry says, with this pencil I finished Evangeline, or something magnificent like this bust of Fanny over here by Bartolini, which is kind of what she looked like when Henry met her just a few months later in Switzerland, to everything in between. It's a magnificent resource, and when I had the opportunity finally to do a new book and to propose an idea to my editor at Alfred Knopf, she said, I love the idea, but you must not only write about Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, it has to be about Fanny Appleton Longfellow. So there have been many biographies over the years, not a major one in 15 or 20 years certainly, but I think this is the first really that will take into account the two. Fanny gets top billing. The title of the book, I'll tell you straight away, well, the working title is Cross of Snow. I derive it from that sonnet that Henry left unpublished at his death. We'll get to it in the course of the program. I think in 14 lines or so, it really in microcosm gives you the story of their love, of their relationship. And it is, and I'll also say it unashamedly, it's a love story. And what is really quite unusual about this love story is that there are really no love letters. You know, there's no Elizabeth Barrett Browning and Robert Browning, there's no John Adams and Abigail Adams, there's no Napoleon and Josephine, and you can go on. John Keats and Fanny Bront, going back, Heloise and Abelard, wonderful love letters. No, there are maybe one or two or three that you could describe, and there are reasons for this, and we'll get into it, because to describe this as a courtship, it's really kind of abusing the word, and that has a lot to do with the relationship that they had prior to their moving into this house. I also want to recognize, before going, Diana Korzanak, who's here in the front row. And she gave this lecture a year ago, and if you haven't seen it, you should. It's on YouTube. It's remarkable. And because of her lecture, I will not be saying anything about the spiritual journal today, because everything you need to know is in that lecture that she gave last year. But Diana, I go back maybe 12 years or so with Jim. I go back 20 with Diana. And we met under entirely different circumstances. I was researching a book which became my second book, Patience and Fortitude. Diana is a noted educator, artist, retired from Mass Art, and she had just placed a major collection of art teaching books to the Huntington Library. And I was really writing about her for this book, about what I like to think of as scholar collectors, people who collected books but with a purpose to deal with their scholarship. And I wrote about her, and then she finally, I have to say, that you badgered me, Diana. She never stopped. And she was really the founder of the Friends of the Longfellow House. You must come here, you must come here. You must take a look at it, and I had other works signed up. Finally, I came, and on the occasion of Henry's 200th birthday in 2007, I wrote a piece for Smithsonian Magazine, and I was hooked. And so really, I've been involved in this for 10 years, under contract now for 4. Please don't ask me when it's going to be done. I'm getting it. It was due about a year and a half ago, but publishers are they're very forgiving. They say, give us your best book, and that's what I'm trying to do. But if Jim is my Virgil, Diana, as I have said, is the godmother of this project. So I do want to thank you for that. I would be remiss if I didn't mention the staff here at National Park Service, historic site, Longfellow House, Washington's headquarters. And I mean, up and down, they are as professional and knowledgeable as anyone I've ever seen. Again, go back 800,000 objects in this house, but they know them, and they know where they are, and they know their significance. So there's been Chris Worth, and Dave Bailey, and Kate Hansen-Plass, and Anna Christie, and Garrett Clory, Beth Law, who's here today. She's the new site, is the site editor. I want to thank you all equally and profoundly, and we're still working, so there's still a long way to go. So we've decided, let me just also say, as we get into Fanny and her home, another pitch point when I was proposing this book was not only would it be a dual biography, but that it would really take advantage of this consideration, this concern, this heightened concern for material culture, for the material object, how scholars, historians, and biographers are increasingly turning to things other than documents that give flesh to the bones of a life. To write a biography is to tell a life, but you need more, if you can get it, if you need more than the words that have been written by them, about them. And what we had here, I think, was a unique opportunity. I regard this place as really a little Herculaneum, if you've ever been there. It's a place that is filled, it's like preserved in amber. You talk about a place that is not only where this poet lived with his wife, it's not only a place where George Washington had his headquarters during the siege of Boston, but when it came over to the National Park Service in the 1970s, it came with its contents. And what I hope to do today is to shed some light on Fanny in her home by paying particular attention to the house, to the rooms, to the contents, and I hope that I've structured this in a way that it makes some sense. So without any further ado, I hope you've had a chance to take a look at this image. It's a Lorenzo Bartolini marble sculpture. It's in the first floor parlor, and that is what they say is what is suggested, is purported to be the only love poem that Henry ever really wrote. I dispute that. I think Across the Snow is a love poem. I mean, it just takes a different form. But this poem is to Fanny, written just a year and a half or so after their marriage, and that is what she would have looked like when he met her. This was done in just a few months. She was in Florence in 1836. They were in Switzerland and they met. So what you're looking at is what he saw for the first time. And he was asked many, many years later, towards the end of his life, was it love at first sight? He said, well, have you read Hyperion? Well, we'll get to that. We'll get to that in a bit. So let's move along here. So Fanny in her home. Well, all right, but we're going to start first on Beacon Hill, because she might have lived here for 18 years, but she lived here for the first 22 or so of her life. And what you're really looking at is pretty much, take out the high rises, and you have where she was born and where she grew up and where she spent many, many fruitful and productive years. She was, let me see if I can do this or not. I can. Okay, cool. So she was born at 54 Beacon Street. And of course, that was about an 8,500 square foot house. I know that because it was recently offered for sale. And I think it's still up there. And then as her father, who was a very affluent industrialist, captain of industry even before the term was coined, moved them up the street a bit to 39 Beacon, which is up by that red flag that you see. Needless to say, the high-rise wasn't there, but this was the center of the universe. And they really did believe it. They were at 39 Beacon Street. This is number 1, basically. And what did they call this? They didn't call it the hub of America or the hub of the planet. They called it the hub of the universe. And Nathan Appleton, her father, served in the state legislature for 10 years or so. He was really one of the great movers and shakers. So when Fanny moves to the country, which this was, in her view, we'll get to that presently, she moved from here. Well, this is her first house, 54 Beacon Street. 200 years ago today, this is where she was born. As you can see, there's a little marker out there. A Colburn house built in 1808 for the merchant James Colburn by the very prominent architect Asher Benjamin. But they very quickly outgrew it, and as they continued to prosper, they moved up the street to 39 Beacon Street. Now, you're not going to find any plaque out there, but for most of the 20th century, it was owned by the Worcester City Club in Boston. I want you to look at this floor. That's the one. I want you to look at this floor because this is where they were married in 1843, that room. Now, 3 weeks ago, on a whim, I Googled 39 Beacon Street. And lo and behold, I saw that it had recently been sold and that it's now for rent. In fact, if you're interested, you can get it for $50,000 a month. I called it, it's a listed price, I believe. And on a whim, I contacted the realtor, Jonathan Radford, and I said, look, I've been studying this woman for 5 or 6 years. Is it possible for me and my wife, who's with me today, Connie, to come in and take a look? He checked with the new owners, and they were very fine with that. So 2 weeks ago, yesterday or so, we went over there to show you very briefly Fanny's home before. And it's very important, not just for how lavish it is and how important and how magnificent. These are my pictures here, I'm pleased to say. This was designed by Parrish, who was a student of Charles Bulfinch. This is a magnificent Bulfinch staircase in the main foyer. Now, I'll take, was this the library? I don't know. It could be. What's very important is that this is where Fanny grew up and where she lived. But you don't see anything on the walls, do you? You don't see anything in these little alcoves. You don't see any statues. You see a magnificent room. This is the room where I believe they were married. This is the parlor overlooking the Boston Common, and it really extends out into this other room, so it's a double. There's 15,000 square feet in this house, so they just doubled their size. And I'll do this very quickly. But you leave out there and you go out to that grand staircase, and that's my picture of the grand staircase looking up to the skylight, the aqua paint up there, and that's at the top And that's the top looking down. So I did those 10 slides very quickly. I'm very happy. Well, now we come to Fanny. If you look, 105 Brattle. We note that painting, that wonderful painting. She's about 17 years old. I guess I love many images of Fanny, but this one really resonates with me as much as the Bartolini Statue and another one that we'll talk about presently. But here we go. Well, this is what the house pretty much looked like when she moved in here in 1843. In fact, this is an image which I found here in the house. It was published in 1853, Homes of American Authors, and this it was copyrighted in 1852. So you can imagine, you can pretty much figure this image was executed shortly, not long after they moved in here. And these are images also from 1878, and as you can see, it's still very countrified out there. And as she writes to her brother-in-law, Sam Longfellow, I won't read you the whole letter, but the salient point is we but just returned to our home and are enraptured with its quiet comfort after that pandemonium New York. Right after their wedding, they went to New York for about 6 weeks or so. Henry, who was a lifelong hypochondriac, there's no other way to say it. I read the ailments and I scream, aspirin, aspirin, what are you going to do? That aside, he was having trouble with his eyes. They went down and they spent 6 weeks there. And then they came back and they moved into this house where he had been a boarder for 6 years prior to that. But in the meantime, her father, as a wedding present, purchased this house and gave it to them. And as she says to her brother-in-law, we have no desire to change a feature of the old countenance which Washington has rendered sacred. That's a very, very important point to make, because really I think her father probably would have preferred that she stay in Boston on Beacon Hill. This really was out there in the sticks, but and she says in the letter, well, I'm out in the country, but I'm 3 miles away. Because that was 3 miles was a long way to travel. But there was kind of a rule where Harvard professors did have to live in Cambridge, and I think they were totally sold on this house, so they moved in here. And I regard it as a house for all seasons, as we see it in the fall. And then when she writes a letter to her cousin, she says, we are living in the old craggy house haunted by Washington's ghost and many fine associations. Father has presented us with it, and most happy are we to inhabit such a noble old mansion. So really, that's where they lived happily for the next 18 years. I'm just going to show you a number of exterior views of the house, of my shots here, my pictures, in the snow, in the winter. They had Christmas Day, they came back, and this is the one I really want you to see. So this is a 1904 chromolithograph, and again it shows kind of what it looked like, I'm sure, not only towards the end of the 19th century, but when they lived there. But now Fanny kept a number of journals, most of them before her marriage. There's one that she kept in her first year of marriage, and she began it on New Year's Day, 1844. And she writes, and she begins it in 1844, and she will conclude it 9 or 10 months later with the birth of her first child, and she says, that's it, I'm not doing any more journaling, I'll write letters, I'll do whatever it is, I'm going to be busy. And it's really too bad, because I think if she had written journals for the rest of her life, we would be talking about her, and you'll see some of these. I put these quotes in there because she dazzles me. She dazzles me more reading her journal, and I've now read them all, than Henry's journals. And I've read all of his. His are informative, they're useful, but when you see a quote like this, after dinner, a drive in a broken-back sleigh round about Mount Auburn, the cemetery right down here. The landscape ghostly with skeleton trees upon hills of frozen snow, gleaming like marble sepulchres. The sky all roses and the evening star is pure and full of love as the eye of an angel. Really, I mean, she really gets this young woman. Then she writes, the moon's winter shadows are very beautiful, delicately penciled on the snow, and then she emphasizes the shadow of the shade, which I believe Diana will tell us is an artistic term for shadows at night, shadows upon shadows. This young woman is thinking as a writer. She's using imagery, and she's just dazzling us with her footwork, which just really, I have to say, amazes me every time I have a chance to look at it. I really wanted to get that quote in there. And I won't go through this entire quote here, but it's a summerish day. I did want to just show you the house in its various aspects, its guises, where she had moved in with her husband and very quickly began to raise a family. I chose this one for the spring. I want you to note the date, May 20th, 1861. The purple buds of the lilacs tip the hedges, and the flowery tide of spring sweeps on. Henry planted these lilacs, and of course the gardeners told me they're never going to go. The lilacs last forever, and these are quite magnificent. I always try and time a visit here in the spring when the lilacs are in bloom. But look at the date, May 20th, 1861. Life couldn't be better. They couldn't be happier. They have 5 wonderful children. He's easily the most popular, the most revered poet, not only in the United States, but probably on both sides of the Atlantic. And yet tragedy will strike in 6 weeks and everything will change. So their 18 years here, unbeknownst to all of them, will soon come to a close and everything will change. As we said, Washington is held secret, so let's go in and start looking around some of the rooms. Upstairs on the 2nd floor, where Henry lived as a boarder. And it is amazing, if you visited the Wadsworth Longfellow house in Portland, and I really urge that you do, because this is the great Longfellow house here. But that house is pretty fantastic as well. You will find that they have a great reverence there for George Washington as well. You'll find his presence in many of the rooms. You'll find his presence here in just about all of the rooms. But here on the 2nd floor, you have a portrait, and you have in Henry's hand that poem that he wrote in 1845, from To a Child. He says, once within these walls, one who memory oft recalls, the father of his country dwelt, and he goes on. And that is what George Washington pretty much looked like when he lived here. That was done by Charles Wilson Peale, 1779. This particular version of it is at the Yale Art Gallery. And this was the tradition that they were preserving at the house. And you'll find Washington in every room. Poetry critics, people like Helen Bendler and Christopher Ricks, Harold Bloom, they'll tell you when they approach a poem, they give it a very close reading. And they not only go line by verse and line by line and word by word. I try to do the same thing when I have the opportunity to a room of the house. We go into a room, and how do we read a room? What does the room tell us about the people who lived in there? Well, there's that statue. If you look at the so there's Fanny right there, the Bartolini bust. This is, if any room can be said, I think, to have been hers, it would be this one. This was also the room used by Martha Washington when she lived here with her husband, the general, during the siege of Boston. Again, there's a Washington corner over there. You see a portrait of their sons, Charlie and Ernie, right over there. But I really want you to take note of this desk. That desk, now there was nothing on the walls in 39 Beacon Street. What is so important, as magnificent a structure as that was, and how it really tells us that Fanny Appleton lived there, it really tells us nothing beyond the bare walls. We have to come to a place like this and see things not only that they brought to it and that they filled it with, but things that they brought with them. Now that desk, I don't have any pictures here, but it's an amazing desk. And that was Fanny's desk at 39 Beacon. And it opens up in so many different ways. You have drawers that open up. And the right, in fact, there's a very short, brief video on the National Park Service that really gets into it. It's a fantastic piece of furniture. It was rehabbed by her father, and she brought it with her. I just see Fanny sitting at that desk, but she's looking out the window, and she sees Henry rowing his boat in the Charles, and she writes a magnificent entry, which is also in that 1844 journal. So this is, again, reading this room tells you so much about Fanny. And the dining room is also very, I think that this is kind of a Fanny Appleton Longfellow room too. This is where they had their dinners, famous dinners. You notice the table is small, it's set for 4, but generally they had 8 people. Charles Dickens, long after Fanny died, but he came here for Thanksgiving Day in 1867. He sat here, and he thought silently to himself what happened in the room next door. Henry's daughters showed Dickens around the house. Dickens's books are kind of on the wall behind my back where this picture is. And he noted, well, you have the best books here. But I do want you to notice a few of the things here. You have this very famous, this very famous portrait of the daughters, and you have these two portraits over here, which are magnificent portraits that are built by Gilbert Stuart of Fanny Appleton's parents, Nathan Appleton and Maria Teresa Rose Appleton, which came to the house after she passed away and after they passed away. And we'll just go to the next image, just give you a little closer detail here. So there's Maria Teresa. That's, of course, they dominate the room. These are very famous paintings, and they were done in about 1806. And as Diana Kurznick has pointed out in one of her essays, it was really through her contacts that the introduction to Gilbert Stuart was made. She knew the family. She studied in Boston at the Berry Street Academy, and right after Nathan Appleton married her, it was really through that association that these portraits were produced. But I really want you to take note of this little tiny picture right down there. Let's get to that as we go to the next image. So this, we talked about the Bartolini Statue in Florence. This was produced in Paris, again, before she meets Henry. That's Fanny on the right, that's her sister Marion, and it's a miniature. And the artist is famous, Jean-Baptiste Isabey. When this picture was completed, it hung in the Louvre for 6, 7, 8 months before it came back to the United States. I think this paragraph that she wrote, the first paragraph at the top, she talks about going to his studio, spending 2 hours with him, and she becomes fascinated. She interviews him really. I think she's paying as much attention to him as he is to her. She is studying him. This final paragraph, if I were an editor, thinking to bring out an edition of Fanny's, trying to whittle this thing into publishable shape, because her journals in Europe have approached 200,000 words, so they're very lengthy. But this paragraph to me is almost perfect. And if I were editing it, I'd maybe make one little change, and maybe I wouldn't. But I'm not going to read many things aloud, but I do have to do this one because this is about my favorite. We left Paris in a drizzle, rumbled down the Rue Rivoli, dashed through the Place du Carrousel and along the quay. Looked our last of the old Pont Neuf, Notre Dame, and our daily rendezvous, the Institute, where perhaps good old Isabey was sitting in his cunning little boudoir, adding a new grace to the pictured forms of the wanderers. These are the wanderers. And this is where my little edit would be. I think I put a period there, and I just start "and Paris" as a new sentence, but that's really just nitpicking. And Paris, with all its life and its gaiety, its splendor and its meanness, its comfort and its mud, faded in the distance, and we were once more fairly wandering on the face of the earth. Well, she's quoting Shelley's Queen Mab here. Her mind is all over the place when everything is on point. She uses Queen Mab as an epigraph to this particular journal. And there they are. That would have been a perfect place to conclude that particular volume, I thought. But in any case, she goes on. It's a masterpiece. So then we have the library. We're not going to do all the rooms of the house. We're just going to go through downstairs here. This is called the library, although the study is next door. Books are everywhere. Again, reading the rooms, see the busts. There was a book collector, a bibliophile I wrote about in my first book, a gentleman that's called Sir Robert Cotton, probably the greatest collector in the history of England. His books really began with reviews to form the British Library, and the top, every one of his famous book presses, he had a bust of a Roman emperor. And to this day, hundreds of years later, if you want to refer to the Beowulf manuscript or the Lindisfarne Gospels, it'll start with Nero or whatever name of the emperor was on top of the book. And I don't know if Henry had this in mind or Fanny had this in mind when they picked these busts to put on top of these book presses. But everything is considered, nothing is by chance. And this is the room, we will touch very lightly on this, but this is also the room where Fanny had her catastrophic accident. At one of those two tables, perhaps, I don't know. That piano was not original to their time. That's a later one brought in by one of the daughters. The original piano, I believe, is at the Longfellow House up in Maine. Just looking a little closer at this room, there are some of the busts. That bust of Sappho, the poetry of Sappho, was just being discovered. The papyrus were being exhumed from the sands of the deserts of Oxyrhynchus in Egypt. And she was just electrifying the world with that. She was really an unknown poet before that. And Thomas Crawford did this statue, the famous sculptor, and he sent this to Henry as a gift. The Franz Liszt portrait, well, that kind of comes after Fanny, but he had Healy do a painting of that to recall a meeting that he had where Liszt came and answered the door by candlelight. And of course, Goethe nominates another book, Crest. So the study is really Henry's room, okay? And I think he would be mightily amused to know that it was, this was a man cave. I mean, this is where, and it's just, and you really have to look hard to find touches of Fanny in here. And and these are all images that I found here in the house, and I photographed them. That's from Scribner's Monthly, November 1878, so Henry is still very much alive. The Hollywood print, he's still very much alive, and of course there he is photographed, seated in there, and it really hasn't changed very much. But again, I've thrown a lot of stuff into this one image here, and we're not going to go through all of it, but there is just an order to everything, and I almost think it's Dantesque. Everything has a place and a layer. I mean, Dante stands above everything. That's Dante on the far wall, on that mirror. And if you look, as Jim Shea pointed out to me, he's looking to his right down to Virgil, who's at the lower left here. That portrait of Henry is by Ernest. These are Eastland Johnson portraits, sort of living, and his friends are in the second level. So you have Sumner, and you have Nathaniel Hawthorne, you have Henry, and you have Emerson in those pictures. And of course that desk over there, that's his standing desk. And that bust of Goethe, if you read Hyperion, he tells you exactly when he bought that bust when he was in Heidelberg, and this is before he met Fanny. And that was a sentinel for him. That was really with him when he was doing all of his writing in that room. But Fanny is here, I argue. Fanny is here because it is here, after the death of Fanny, where the Dante Club meets, where he really, in his greatest moment of grief, he turns to Dante. He says, when I can't do anything original, I go to Dante. And what does he do? He is the first American to translate the Divine Comedy into English to complete all three of the three texts. And it's done in this room. And of course, Matthew Pearl wrote the novel, The Dante Club, based all of it on material that's at the Houghton Library. So I really believe the spirit of Fanny is in this room, because really, and I regard it as arguably one of his greatest achievements is that translation. So, we say the study is not we don't find touches of Fanny in here, but we certainly have him in the study, don't we? And we look out in this, and he says, and we know the poem, from my study I see in the lamplight descending the broad hall stair, brave Alice and laughing Allegra and Edith with golden hair. Well, that's the very famous poem, The Children's Hour. Again, written about those three little girls there that you see in the painting, which was in the dining room. And I've included this little carte de visite. It's tiny. And it's not in the house. It once was. And it was, I believe it was sent by Alice. It was presented to the Maine Historical Society. And it is now in their collections. I think it probably should have stayed here. But what it is, it's a very inexpensive little carte de visite. It's as you can see, there's a little pinhole at the top. It's small, it's tiny. And it's in a little metal frame, and it was lying. It was found on the Battle of Gettysburg shortly after, among the thousands of dead. Whether it was a Confederate soldier or a Union soldier, nobody knows. It could have been either. Henry was beloved by all of them. And when you think of these dreams of home life, of domesticity, and how that poem had touched so many of them, and that was found, I find it very, very poignant. And it just gives you some suggestion of not only how much the life in this house affected other people, but how they even carried an image of these three children with them as they went off into mortal combat. Well, I'm not going to spend much time with the books, but believe me, there are 12,000 or so in here. And they are everywhere. And I think the last count, 11,799, 45 different dialects, 14 or so languages. Henry undoubtedly read them all, because he was a linguist. He was brilliant, and Fanny read quite a few of them herself. And one thing we do learn when we read her journals, how as his eyes were tired, he never wore glasses, whatever was wrong, but I think he just loved it that she read to him. She read to him, and as that 1 year journal shows she also wrote with him. She worked with him. She calls a volume of European poetry that they're working on our book. She's helping him with the translations, and she couldn't be happier. She was once a princess of Beacon Hill. Now she's living in Cambridge. And let me just point out, and let me say before I forget, not only is it a great love story, but what makes it really, really interesting is that it's an intellectual relationship. I mean, what really, I think, dazzles us about this marriage is that it is really, there's so much intellectual synergy going on that they really have met. Two equal minds have met, and they just thrive. And you see it not only in the books, but in the letters that they write. And I'll just show you quickly. That was Henry's book motto, non clamor, sed amor, not noise, but love. And it was a Latin phrase, obscure, that he found, that he translated, and he uses it as a book point in many of his books, not all of them. And that's the Dickens bookshelf over there, by the way, on the upper right. So we'll just go briefly through these. Now, without getting into the letters, but here they are, and I have not picked them for any reason other than the fact that they make a nice image. But there are hundreds of them here. And Kate Hansen-Plass, I think she told me we have 1,100 pages of transcription so far. And what the staff, let me just say again, what the staff has done here is heroic. It would take me another 15 years to do this book if I had to read all of these letters and all of these journals without the benefit of these transcriptions. And if the staff has not done anything else, what they've done this year to celebrate Fanny is to finally give scholars access to the contents of these letters and these journals. So this is all I'm going to show you, is just a couple photographs. And let me tell you, it's not easy. I wrote a book about paper. I know paper was scarce, it was expensive. When you wrote letters, you used every available space of white space. Not only that, when you finished writing crossways, you went the other way. And just look at how this writing, how the staff has managed to transcribe these is really is a great testament to their professional skill. So we're going to now go from these rooms and these artifacts, and this is off the tour, okay? So when you visit the house, you don't get to go down here into the basement. Now these are not the actual. This is not the actual stairway to the storage area, but I included this picture. These are the stairs in the original house, not the L. And I included that because Henry found there, when they were living in the house, and all of a sudden, papers started falling out of the stairway. Which one? Show you the right one. Right there, this stairway. And they turned out to be letters between Andrew Craigie, the former owner, Mrs. Craigie's husband. She was a widow by then. And they were, let's just say they were letters exchanged with a woman who was not his wife. And Dickens was really fascinated by that story. And we were walking down the stairs and another piece of paper. And I don't know, this door, we go downstairs and we take a right and we go into the storage, and that's Dave Daly. And when we say there are 800,000 artifacts and objects in this house, let me tell you, you're just looking at the tip of the iceberg. But we walk by this door, and not only is it old, and I don't know how far back it dates, I don't think anyone can think. I don't know if it goes back to Washington's days or Henry's days. It is in the L part. But what I also want you to notice is that it's brick. One of the reasons this house has lasted so long is it has a wooden veneer to be sure, but it's built with brick. And you can see it here. That's Dave Daly on the lower right. So when I'm going in to see, after spending maybe 2 weeks working with the materials, the documents, it's time for another, Jim Shea would say, are you ready for another walk through the house? Because it's time to see things anew and in a new light, because there's always something new. Usually it's Dave that takes me on that walk. So just to show you some of the things that are down there. Frankie Weatherwell, Fanny Appleton Longfellow Weatherwell, the great-granddaughter of Henry and Fanny, told me during an interview I had with her that the Longfellows say everything. And I think that you can just get a suggestion of it. So how did these help you write a biography? Well, you have to look and you have to choose. Occasionally you might run across a mirror like this. It was Henry's 4th anniversary present to Fanny. And it's the fairest for Fanny, the fairest gardener in her book, I think. and in her mind, the wisest, well, help me out, I don't know, but you'll notice it's their wedding anniversary, 1847. Some of the greatest artifacts here, material objects, are the journals Fanny kept. Without getting into the content too much, because it's been handled very capably by Diana Christie in her wonderful discussion of Fanny's European journals, so I won't get into it here. But I want you to look at how beautiful this is one of the two sketchbooks she kept during that European trip when she met Henry. I maintain that it's a form of self-publication. I mean, tell me I'm wrong. But it's a magnificently produced book. It's leather, it's gilded gold, handmade paper, marbled pages. And this is one of the two sketchbooks she kept, and I'm going to do it very quickly, but this is the one that starts in New York Harbor. The boat was becalmed, and she says, decidedly, she see a gray and commonplace, but I sketched a pretty view of the opposite shore, a dark, picturesque windmill, houses and ships, this for the last link to American ground. This, by the way, where I start my own introduction to Fanny. I introduced her to you to her in my book, Fully Grown. I wanted her to be Athena-like. I want you to see her in all her magnificence, the way Henry meets, the way she has turned out when Henry meets her, when he will be meeting her in Switzerland. And this is the young woman. This is where I start my chapter with her. And then, by the way, there's a lot of, I use the word synergy. There's a lot of synergy going on. So this is Vaucluse, where she goes and she makes these pilgrimages. She wants to go to the birthplace of Cicero. She wants to go to Keats's gravestone in Rome. She wants to visit, here she visits the home of Petrarch and Vaucluse, and while she's there, so that's the drawing, the sketch that she does on the left, but while she's there, she plucks a laurel leaf from a tree said to have been planted by Petrarch, and she affixes that in a journal. That's, almost 200 years. Look how wonderfully it's been preserved. She says, grafted in Vaucluse, you can see it. And then a few days later, she goes to the grave of Laura, the object of Petrarch's sonnets, and there she gets a juniper sprig, and she puts that in the notebook. These are other sketches that she does. She goes to the Paestum of Magna Greca, a vanished city buried in the long grass of all ruins, the most beautiful and most unsolved. The Colosseum, she absolutely loved it. And when she went there one night, she insisted she see it by the first time by a full moon. And when she goes with 3 stagecoaches filled with American tourists who are unruly, she goes ballistic. She writes one of the longest diatribes, and I say is, Fanny, take it easy. This too shall pass. But then you have to remind yourself that she's just 18 years old when she's writing this, but that she thought they had disrespected what they were looking at so severely, and then she went back and she calmed down a little bit. But I want this because I suggest, maybe Diana will, you agree with me? Thank you. That's our Fanny right there, folks, right there in the lower right. Isn't it the same gorgeous young woman with the corkscrew curls? Got her little sketchbook to hand and a little cameo of herself. Just absolutely wonderful. Which brings us to another little book that, again, she did these clippings of these cuttings of plants, various Virgil's grave, Cicero's grave, wherever, and she puts them, and this is a book, these are all Chris Worth's hands, by the way. He's holding the book open, very delicately leaning over her shoulder, taking pictures. But it's just what you talk about multitasking. She's sketching, she's journaling, she's saving these plants. She's also making an occasional entry in her spiritual journal. She's writing letters. What does this young woman want to do with her life? That's one of the great mysteries, isn't it? We won't get to it here. But does she dream of being an artist or a writer even? I don't know. This is something we have to determine, I think. But I do want, this is great. Here we go. So this is during that trip. I want to see if I can use this little pointer here. So this is now this is back in her journal. Now, if you can see up there, Professor Longfellow sends up his card to Father. Hope the venerable gentleman won't pop in on us, though I did like his ultramea. Well, it tells you a couple of things. Number one, okay, and she's been so busy. She's been doing sketches. They just arrived that day from Barron and Boom, and she's going out to dinner, and all of a sudden, this American sends up his card, but she knows him. She's so well read, she thinks because he's a professor at Harvard, he must be old. But she knew his book, and she did like it. I think it's pretty interesting. So finally, down below, she does say, "Call down to welcome Mrs. Motley and Professor Longfellow. A young man, after all, or else the son of the poet." So to be clear that we're all on the same page, this is not the Henry she saw in Switzerland. This is the often called the white Mr. Longfellow, and that for the beard that he grew in the years following the death of his wife. His face and his hands were severely injured in the fire, the horrible, catastrophic fire, and so she never even knew him with a beard. And I chose these three because there's three different kinds of media, isn't it? You've got oil, and that's a facsimile of the bust of him that stands in Westminster Abbey, the only American to be so honored, and that's a wonderful photograph taken by the great photographer Julia Margaret Kemp. So that's not the Henry Longfellow we met. This is the Henry Longfellow she met. And that's kind of what he looked like. And the upper right, that's a sketch. It was done in Sweden, actually, while he was there with his first wife just before she had a miscarriage and passed away tragically. And this is a few months before he met Fanny. And I also picked these five because they also, the 19th century is so magnificent. You're talking about images. You got five different images here, and you got five different media. You got an oil. You got a silhouette, which is a very big deal. This was done by a very famous maker of silhouettes. These were actually lost at sea, and they were recovered. And this was done of Henry in 1841. There's a photograph. And this bust, I know we have many, many busts of Henry in the house. There's one room, and I asked, who are these three busts? And Dave Daly said, that's Henry, that's Henry, that's Henry. So we call that the Henry, Henry, Henry room. And, but this one's up in Maine. I did want to get the Portland house in, and it's kind of the Roman, the Julius Caesar book, I guess. But that's the gentleman that she met, and that's the young man that will be wooing her for the next 7 years, and that's another story. So this is a sketchbook, another sketchbook, not the one I just showed you, and this sketchbook will be her gift to Henry on their wedding day. Now again, when I say, let me show you a material object that tells a story in and of itself. Okay, I'll go very briefly. This is in Thun. It's July 13th. Places that she went to in Switzerland. This is on the very day that she meets Henry. But what I really want you to look at is the dedication page. Mary Ashburton to Paul Fleming, July 13th, 1843. This young woman could have presented him with any wedding present, but what she does give him is this book. And if you know Hyperion, the novel, the roman à clef that he wrote when he came back, writing about his pursuit of her and his rejection. This is the first illustrated edition of 1853. And very definitely, there's no question that it's about Henry and it's about Fanny, and she was really not happy about the way he portrayed her. She really would rather he didn't write anything. But these images were done by a very noted artist by the name of Burkett Foster, and so this is Paul Fleming, and this is when you have that as a subtext, and then you know what she's basically saying. Finally, he explains what he meant by Hyperion, and she writes him one of the few letters before their marriage, which was regarded as a courtship letter. She says, "I'm so glad you explained to me what you had in mind without telling us what it was." So we have yes. Well, they worked together. I said they were, she helped him with his poetry. And one of the things they did do during that meeting, when they first met in Switzerland, was they translated some German poems together. You know, Henry, he knew 12 languages. Well, she knew 4 or 5 of her own. And she helped him with a poem, which he later said, her translation, this 18-year-old girl, was better than his. And going through the Harvard, this is from the Houghton Library, we also have a holographic copy here, but I love this, because if you notice, this castle by the sea from the German of Ulan by Fanny E. Appleton and Henry W. Longfellow. She puts her name first. And it's done, I think, presented in a way, it's kind of, is it a form of self-publication? I don't know, but she's pretty proud of it. Again, I'm just going to show you some of these other artifacts because they are beautiful. Fanny often does these little sketches in her journals. We're going to move quickly. After the birth of her first child, she doesn't journal, but she does keep the Chronicle of the Children of Craigie Castle. And it's a tiny little book. Now, it's not a beautiful little book that's magnificently tooled in leather or in gold, but she keeps the events of her children. She calls them her chicks. I want you to notice, it's right here, Chronicle of the Children of Craigie Castle. This is Craigie House. And the very first day, Charlie comes in, he shows her a toy that Henry had brought her from the night before, and he's very happy. And she has that sort of thing in it, but she also has this sort of thing in it. Her first daughter, also named Fanny, died as a child, about 18 months, and she writes about it in here. Cut a few locks from her holy head, placed her in the library with unopened roses. I mean, it's heartbreaking. Dr. Francis spoke over her and she was carried to Mount Auburn. Struggled almost in vain with the terrible hunger of the heart. I mean, is that a writer's phrase? The hunger of the heart to hold her once again. Every room, every object recalls her, and the house is desolation. And of course, we know they clipped hair. And here's a little snippet of hair that she clipped when her child was 6 weeks old. So these are Fanny's desks. This one just came to the house a couple years ago. How important was writing and sketching to her? Well, this is her equipment. This is likely the writing desk that she carried with her, certainly up to Niagara Falls, perhaps on the trip to Europe, because there's another one. But this just came in. Frankie Weatherall brought this in. It was a great-great-grandmother. You notice Francis E. Appleton, Boston, 1832. There's this other one, far more elegant, and it's bought at a very fancy place in Boston. They both used, like the other desk, sharpening accessories. I'm going to move a little quickly now because they still have a bit to go. Jewelry, a lot of things made with hair. Hair was a big thing. Clippings, locks, very, very sentimental and very significant. Why are they clipping hair? Photographs, 12,000 or so photographs in the collection. Many of the stereoscopic views. There's one of their stereoscopic boxes. There's a house that they had pictures of their own house. There's Henry out in the haunt, and he's dressed in a suit and tie. He's at the beach, and that's the only photograph of him at the haunt. But they have these views, and they enjoyed them. But really, we also have photographs that are to be found nowhere else. Photographs of the family. There are only 2 photographs taken of Henry and Fanny together. So you have this one with the boys. And you have this one, and this is really, I love this, even though it's out of focus, but that's where Fanny is looking directly at you, and she's smiling. I just think it's wonderful. That was taken at Newport with friends, 1852. And here she is with her sons, reading, always reading. She even thought about writing children's books. Her children were everything. And this book is on display over in the house right now, one of the many books that she really liked for her children. Now let's look at some photos quickly of Fanny. I want you to keep in mind these 2 pictures, both undoubtedly taken on the same day at the same studio. There are no records to document that, but I think the circumstances make that clear. And then we have these others, and there's one of her calling cards. She's usually in profile. Very rarely do we, this is the way we took photographs in the early years of photography. These are the way her children saw her. So that's by Edie in the upper left, and that's by Ernie in the upper right. I thought this was by one of the other kids, but Kate and Chris told me that's Henry. Henry did that one on the lower right. This is when she was expecting her first child. So that was done by Henry. Now these are more like this. These look like the pictures that I might do, but these are the kids doing pictures of their father. And this is a picture of the house by Ernie. If you notice Henry in the lower right, Fanny in the right next to him, 2 little girls looking out the window. Pictures of the house by the kids. I'm going to go very quickly through these pictures here. But I do, again, we have hundreds of the children's drawings preserved here. We're talking about things that are there. And of course, Henry was a very hands-on kind of father. This is just the year following the death of Fanny, and so he's with them, and he's Edith to Papa, Christmas 1862. And there they are. This is also after Fanny's death, and there they are celebrating Christmas. And this is all in Henry's handwriting. Edie's first musical composition, 1860. Annie's first needlepoint, 1861. Ernie's first oil painting. These are all in those drawers downstairs. The children also did these plays, these little, which they wrote, and they had, these are two of the books. They had, if you can see, various members of the family came and played some various parts. They put on these little tableaux. We mentioned Fanny taking clippings of her children's hair. I'll just say that this, if you notice, Edith's hair, July 1861, and this is the fatal day. This is what she was doing. That she was taking clippings of her. There are 5 envelopes, and one of them is empty. Here we are down in the basement. There's Jim Shea, there's Kate, there's Chris. And there we are looking through. Look at the clothing that they have, fabulous shoes. Wouldn't Fanny be aghast to know that we are looking at magnifying glasses, not only at her shoes, but at her undergarments and her monogram clothing. And you say, well, what kind of, how does that help you know life? Well, there aren't many of her dresses that survive. And Kate found these various purple satin sleeves and velvet decorations. And they say, well, look, that pretty much matches that photograph, doesn't it? That other photograph of Fanny. That hangs in their bedroom upstairs. To tell you, I've been working on this up until the last day. Kate posted this on the, if you've been paying attention, on the blog last night. I hadn't seen that dress. Look how magnificent it is, though. It's a formal ball gown shipped to Fanny from Paris by her brother, Tom, about 1860. Research to confirm continues. Well, I'd say it's 98%, because it's been in the house all these years. It's her size. There are letters to her brother thanking him for the dress. She fails to say what color it is, but I think you're really looking at, and then Kate did some more work measuring the stitching. She's a tall woman, 5'10". This would be just right for a woman who's 5'10". She's 2 inches taller than Henry, by the way. We talk about a stately, commanding woman. All of those things. Don't you love this dress? Okay, Jim says a curator is there to, we have objects, but it is a curator's responsibility to interpret it and tell you how it fits into the whole scheme of things. Is that a magnificent dress? Whose dress was it? Do we know? Well, look at this. There's Alice Longfellow as Evangeline with her sisters. It's exactly, we'll go back. Just one more look. The bonnet, the dress, and there it is. And this picture not only tells you that it's a beautiful dress, but that his work is well known. His children are doing presentations based on it. It's magnificent. Fanny kept swatches. This is from her father's mills. That's all of her handwriting. She picks the clothing, the fabrics for the children's clothing, for these daguerreotypes. We're coming now to the conclusion of the presentation. And what I hope it does is bring all of these various skills that I've been trying to discuss. You talk about materiality, you talk about documents, you talk about literary documents, you talk about pictures, photographs, setting, place, all of these things. When you're trying to write a narrative and you write a biography, you want to bring all of these things together. Now here's the poem, the sonnet, The Cross of Snow. Now I knew when I was going through this is at the Houghton Library, and it was in a folder where there are various poems. But as archivists will tell you, everything must be kept in a precise order. So I have to say, when I turned this over, and I realized I was looking at the holographic copy of The Cross of Snow, and the envelope came in. And it was left unpublished at his death. It was left in this envelope. And it was written on the 18th anniversary. They were married for 18 years to the day. And he wrote this sonnet, as you can see the date, July 10th, 1879, 18 years to the day of her death. So we're not to try and read it here, but I'm just going to do a little something here. And that's the wrong one. So we are now in the upstairs bedroom. And he says, in the long sleepless watches of the night, a gentle face, the face of one long dead, looks at me from the wall, where round its head the night lamp casts a halo of pale light. There's his wife, there's the room. Clearly talking about this room, he's looking at the picture. Here in this room she died, and soul more white, never through martyrdom of fire was led to its repose, nor can in books be read the legend of a life more Benedict. So let's be clear. It's not just by chance. He's talking about martyrdom of fire. without again getting into the details, and the fact that he has worked on Dante and the Inferno and Purgatorio and Paradiso, what he's talking about here. And the word Benedict, it's the only arcane word. Some people might say this is Henry being Henry. He needed a word to rhyme with white. No. Benedict is an archaic word, but it has as its provenance Benedict, Saint Benedict. It's a blessing and it's a gift. And through the miracle of Google, if you do a Google search of Longfellow's poetry and you go to the Divine Comedy, he uses that word at least 5 times in his translation of the Divine Comedy, and in instances that really do suggest he's thinking not only of Beatrice or Beatrice, but of his wife. That's to be discussed in the book. Now he switches, 14 lines. There is a mountain in the distant west that, sun-defying in its deep ravines, displays a cross of snow upon its side. The country this was the year of time of manifest destiny. 1874, a photographer came back with this picture of a mountain, just discovered, first time seen by non-Native Americans, and it really did have a cross of snow on its side. Whether or not Henry saw this photograph can't be said for sure, but he certainly probably can say with a good degree of certainty he saw this painting by Thomas Moran. And so he says, such is the cross I wear upon my breast these 18 years, through all the changing scenes and seasons, changeless since the day she died. Oh. So some people say, well, can we really prove that he saw the painting? And so we know it was exhibited in Boston. We know he went to the Philadelphia Exposition where it was shown. We know the picture was reproduced in a book of poems by Bryant, and so he probably saw that. But going through the Harvard files and all of the letters, I found this letter by that should do it right here. Letter from the landscape artist Thomas Moran to Longfellow. He's the artist. And he talks about the cross of snow. He hoped to come see him. He's a great fan of Henry's. He has done some illustrations of Hiawatha, and he's going to do the hanging of the crane. So I think it's pretty persuasive that Henry knew the painting. I'm going to give you a happy birthday to Fanny. 3 weeks ago, went up to Bowdoin College, mainly to study Henry's earliest years. And lo and behold, I don't expect to find Fanny up there, but they have just, and I mean within the last month and a half, acquired a collection of photographs from this Longfellow family. Through a bookseller, James Arsenault, where these photos originally came from, I don't think we know just yet, but I think it's probably the extended family. But in there are many, many pictures of Alexander Longfellow's family in there. There's this previously undocumented picture of Fanny and her daughter, Alice. It's in a carte de visite. You remember that picture, those 2 pictures I showed you earlier? Taken the same day. These pictures of Fanny, same dress, same balustrade, same painting. This is a detail from the one recently found. And if that's not wonderful, Kate Hansen-Class just yesterday sent me this JPEG to the left, because that's Alice on the right. And she said, aha, I knew I'd seen that dress before. And she found this in Alice Longfellow's files. And tell me that's not the same dress and the same hat. That's kind of wonderful. But if that's not enough, how about these? Save these for last. These are 2 previously undocumented, or certainly among scholars, of Fanny and Henry, dated to about 1860. If it's the case, then they're probably the last photographs taken of the 2 of them before Fanny's death. And it is a front picture of Fanny in a bonnet. And it's pretty spectacular. They were clearly taken in the same studio in Boston, same date, they're dated 1860. And it's pretty spectacular. But I thought when I saw that, I've looked at the garments down there. Is that the same bonnet that Kate and Chris showed me 2 years ago when I took a picture of? I don't know, we're going to have to look. But again, we use these objects to try and give us a little bit of synergy of what we're doing. So I'm going to wrap it up. We talked about House for All Seasons. Every Christmas, the staff goes down and they bring out things and give you a sense of how the Longfellows celebrated Christmas and observed it. It's wonderful. I urge you all to come if you haven't been. And what they do is also they put these lights outside. They do nice stage dailies out there planting these live lights, and it's pretty spectacular. And I thought Henry's little poem written during the Civil War, 1864, I heard the bells on Christmas Day and old familiar carols play. And wild and sweet the words repeat of peace on earth, goodwill to men. So I'll conclude. Happy birthday, Fanny. Thank you all for coming. And I would happily answer any questions if anyone has any. And thank you, and again, thank you, Jim Shea, for making such a day possible. Any questions?
Yes.
Oh, back on the room.
Can you say a little about her death?
I didn't see the.
Make sure to say I'm sorry.
Can you speak a little about her death?
I'm fine.
About her death?
Yes.
I could, I guess, but you know, I see today as a day of celebration. It's a horrible, it's a horrible story. It is. There's no upside to it. There's nothing that you say. Well, I thought that today I had things in here which I decided to take out. I just left that one little lock in here, and you can find that easily. And I think I'll just say it because this is her day. Any others? Diana? You were the inspiration for this. You made me come here. Really. And boy, when we came, it was magnificent. Yes?
This is such an, I see somebody else here. It's such an incredible thing that you're doing. And it's particularly heartening to me as a woman, because I think here we have a very strong woman speaking up for herself. That's my interpretation.
And there's so much more, by the way, than we even barely suggested in here.
And I was just confessing, I thought, here's Longfellow, the two most recent photographs. Longfellow maturing into quite a handsome man, actually. And I don't blame Fanny. She looks wonderful, but she had a great profile. So it wasn't she had most of them from the side. I don't know, but I think
Well, you know what?
very-
It's also the way they took pictures. You got to sit still for like a minute,
Yeah,
and they didn't smile, and
yeah.
it wasn't fair. And I
But
think
she's a very forceful person. Now, a totally separate question, and I wonder if anybody can answer this. I find it very intriguing, since I live in Santa Fe, New Mexico, to see the farolitos there, obviously those look like paper bags. Do you know anything about how?
Anna Christie.
I've put out hundreds of them.
How long have they been using paper bags? Because,
Well, I've done it it's been about 5 years.
Yeah.
More than that.
We're not recreating an 19th century practice.
Yeah, I think it's just something we do to bring people into the site, and it
It's
really
great.
sets the mood for when they come into the house.
well, since I grew up around here and now I live in Santa Fe, this is a very heartwarming picture. And I just happen to know that farolitos, they're from an Arabic term, faro, meaning lamp, but they became very popular in the United States, particularly Southwestern, after the flat-bottomed paper bag was invented. So,
By a woman.
Yes, Nick,
Yeah. No,
You said at the
flat bottom
beginning of
paper
your talk
bag.
that your your publisher said that you needed to include Henry. And,
Oh, no, Fanny.
well,
Yeah, it's the other way around.
I thought you had said that the book you're going to do is going to be about both Henry and Fanny.
It is.
Why not just about Fanny? Was there a reason for marketing that we needed
Well, I think,
Henry?
again, today we celebrate Fanny,
Yes.
but Henry is equally as compelling to me.
Mhm.
And I think that there is enough material to bring a new perspective to the telling of his life. I have a number of things I think you'll be reading about for the first time in my book. And I think also the story, again, you taking my cue from that sonnet, really is about this relationship. I'm writing it from alternate viewpoints. I present Fanny in her voice, kind of from the point of view, and then I bring you back to Henry, and then that's kind of halfway into the book. Now I've got them together, and I have to figure out how to.
So it's the story of the two of them.
Oh, totally, but the two of them, and really trying to give you a sense not only of this, well, it's a love story. I mean, I know a lot of people back off from that, but it's an extraordinary love story. And there are no love letters. I mean, let me say that again. So you have to really come at this through other ways, other means, through journal entries, through letters to others, through things in the house, through people who observe them. Oliver Wendell Holmes was quoted riding down Brattle Street one day in a wagon, and the person he was with, Holmes averted his eyes and wouldn't look at the house. This is documented and said, what's going on? He said, life in there is too perfect. Any change could only be for the worse. And this is like a few weeks before the catastrophe. It was a fire that took her life. And leave it at that. Yes, Jim?
I must say, what a pleasure it was working with you all these years too.
Oh, we're not done, are we?
And Nicholas was one of the few people who actually want to see everything. I said, you better be ready, Nick, because there's a lot of stuff in the house.
I said that there's never too much.
And every week, it would be a whole nother collection, and he wants to see everything, photograph everything, and had so many questions, and so curious. And if you've not read his other books, do it. It'll give you a preview of what will probably get in this.
Well, these pictures pretty much were all mine,
Yeah.
and these were, I mean, computers give you a count. I think it's over 16,000 images that I've taken so far. Not just of things, but also documents. The digital camera has revolutionized the way you do nonfiction today. And I mean, you can just photograph it and photograph it and photograph it. And if you've got enough memory, you can keep a good track of how it works. But the trick is to really, how do you pick what's really relevant and to synthesize it into what I hope is a compelling narrative. It's not just enough to tell it, you have to tell it well. And I really want to invite readers in and say, wow, what a great story. It's all about, don't mean a thing if I ain't got that swing. Yes, sir, back.
Did she write anything about the ocean passages?
Oh,
It's very, it's this, these,
Anna Christie.
it's very beginning.
So I mean, I stayed away from Anna's presentation. I give it considerable attention. I start on the ship, the Francis de Paul. She's ready to go. She's 18 years old. They've just suffered another tragedy, the death of her mother, followed 2 years later by the death of her brother, both from consumption. I mean, you can have everything in the world, and yet this horrible illness can take you away in an instant. And the father decides, I'm taking my daughters to Europe. And they've had this moment of grief, but now she goes and she embraces it. I think what amazes me, and I mean, I guess it points to your question. Fanny really can't, I mean, I'm sure that she can. I think Diana's probably working on a book that will cover Fanny exclusively. I can't wait to see it when it's done, and I think it will really cover the earlier years of her life, and that will be really a great addition when it's done. But where was I going with this? But that trip that she makes, and she writes about the ocean, and I'm calling that chapter a child of the tempest. Because one night, I mean, this is a little boat. I mean, I've got a picture of it from a crew member, and it's just a wooden boat. And they leave in the middle of winter, in November, and they're crossing the North Atlantic, and they're out there in what could be, pretty severe storms. Everybody else is sick. She goes topside, and she's standing at the rail, and she's exhilarated. And a wave comes crushing down on her head, and she said, how exhilarating to be baptized at such an altar. And she says, Child of the Tempest. There's my title for that chapter. Right there. Child of the Tempest. And another chapter when she's passing through. I have a whole chapter. I was supposed to do this in one chapter, but then all of a sudden, well, this is too good. You can't just go straight to Italy. France is wonderful, but Italy is magnificent. And when she finally passes from France, and she talks in all these different languages, and she passes into Italy, and she says, au revoir, France. Bellissima Italia. And I call this chapter Bellissima Italia, because this Italian chapter is just absolutely magnificent. She really is a joy. And I have to tell you, I'm writing around her demise, to go back to your demise. But I don't know how I'm gonna deal with it. I mean, it's really, she's precious, she's wonderful, and it's really, her death is tragic, so tragic. And it's just gonna be very difficult to write it. It'll probably be the last thing I write, to be honest with you. And did I have another question?
Bravo.
Oh, thank you.